Ma'am, there's been a system error. You need to move to coach. The words sliced through the first-class cabin like a blade through silk. Sharp. Final. Delivered with the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. What Stephanie Martinez didn't know was that in exactly 11 minutes, the woman she was removing would shut down her entire airline. Dr. Camille Washington looked up from her tablet where she'd been reviewing safety violation reports from her latest inspection tour. 45 years old, medium height, wearing a simple gray hoodie and dark jeans. Her sneakers were scuffed from walking through aircraft maintenance hangars. She didn't look like the Senior Director of Aviation Safety Standards for the Federal Aviation Administration. That was intentional. I'm sorry, Camille said, her voice calm and measured. Stephanie Martinez stood in the aisle of Flight AA847, her uniform immaculate silver wings catching the overhead light. 39 years old, 12 years of service known throughout the crew base for maintaining what she called standards. Her smile was practiced, polite, and completely unforgiving. Your seat assignment, Stephanie continued, gesturing toward the back of the plane. The computer made an error. This section is reserved for our premium passengers. Around them, the first-class cabin hummed with the quiet energy of departure preparation. Miguel Santos in seat 2. A glanced up from his laptop, tech startup stickers covering the case. 28 years old, sharp eyes that missed nothing. His finger hovered over his phone's camera icon. I have a confirmed first-class ticket, Camille replied, reaching for her boarding pass. Seat 1A. Stephanie's eyes flicked over Camille's appearance. The hoodie, the jeans, the absence of designer labels or obvious wealth markers. The calculation was instant and brutal. I understand your confusion, Stephanie said, her voice carrying just enough to reach the surrounding seats. But I need to see your confirmation number. In seat 1B, Linda Thompson lowered her glass of pre-departure champagne. 58 years old, silver hair, perfectly styled, wearing a jacket that cost more than most people made in a month. She watched the exchange with interest, already forming opinions. 3 rows back, Jessica Parker looked up from her travel blog draft. 34 years old, blonde hair pulled into a messy bun camera, always within reach. Something about the tension in the cabin made her finger the record button on her phone. Camille handed over her boarding pass and credit card. Both legitimate. Both clearly indicating first-class service. Stephanie examined them with theatrical suspicion, holding the black card up to the light, as if checking for counterfeiting. This is unusual, she murmured. I'll need to verify this with the gate. It's already been verified, Camille said. At check-in, at security, at the gate. 3 separate confirmations. Near the galley, David Rodriguez froze while organizing safety demonstration equipment. 25 years old, 6 months on the job, still believing the training manuals about treating all passengers with dignity. His stomach twisted as he watched his senior colleague work. Stephanie pressed a button on her console. Her voice rang out over the cabin intercom, clear and authoritative. Gate agent to aircraft, please. We have a seating verification needed in first class. The announcement hung in the air like an accusation. Camille felt every eye in the cabin turn toward her. She recognized the tactic. Public humiliation as a tool of control. Miguel Santos had heard enough. His phone came up, camera app opened. Recording started. He whispered to the screen. Y'all, this is Flight A847 from Phoenix to Atlanta, and something's happening up here that doesn't look right, ma'am. Stephanie continued, her voice now projected for maximum audience. I'm going to need you to gather your belongings and step to the back of the aircraft while we sort this out. No, Camille said simply. The word dropped into the cabin like a stone into still water. Ripples of surprise spread through the first-class section. Stephanie's polite mask slipped slightly. Excuse me, I said no. I'm in my assigned seat. I've done nothing wrong. I'm not moving. Linda Thompson leaned forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to having her convenience prioritized. Oh, for heaven's sake, just move so we can take off on time. Miguel's recording captured it all. His viewer count climbed. 12 people watching, 25, 50. The comments started flowing. This lady in the hoodie is about to teach everyone a lesson. Airplane. Karen alert. Something's not right here. This passenger is too calm. Jessica Parker had started her own recording fingers flying across her phone as she live tweeted the incident. Hashtag AA Flight 847, watching potential discrimination in real time. Woman in casual clothes being questioned about first-class seat. Stephanie turned to David. Call Captain Hayes. We have a disruptive passenger. David hesitated. Nothing about Camille's behavior seemed disruptive. She sat calmly, hands folded, speaking in measured tones. But Stephanie was his supervisor, his job security, his future in aviation. Right away, he said, reaching for the intercom. Camille watched the young flight attendant's face. She saw the conflict there, the moral struggle playing out in real time. She'd seen it thousands of times during safety investigations. Good people choosing silence over principle because the cost of speaking up felt too high. Captain Robert Hayes emerged from the cockpit 3 minutes later, 52 years old, 28 years with the airline, gray hair and tired eyes. A company man who'd learned that the path of least resistance was usually the safest career move. What seems to be the problem here? He asked, voice flat and professionally neutral. Captain Stephanie said this passenger is refusing to follow crew instructions regarding seat reassignment. She's being belligerent and disruptive. Hayes looked at Camille. She sat perfectly still, seatbelt fastened, no luggage in the aisles, no raised voice, no threatening gestures. If this was disruption, it was the quietest kind he'd ever seen. Ma'am, he said, my crew has final authority over passenger seating for safety reasons. I'm going to ask you to cooperate with the flight attendant. Captain Hayes. Camille replied, reading his name tag with deliberate precision. Under what safety regulation are you removing a seated passenger with a valid ticket? The question hung in the air. Hayes hadn't expected to be questioned about regulatory specifics. Most passengers didn't know aviation law well enough to challenge crew decisions. Federal aviation regulations give the pilot in command authority over cabin safety, he said, falling back on the broad authority that covered most situations. They do, Camille agreed. They also require documentation of safety concerns and passenger notification of rights. Do you have that documentation? Miguel's live stream had exploded. 300 viewers became 600, became 1,200. The chat scroll moved too fast to follow. Y'all, this woman knows the rules better than the crew. She's about to school these people. Plot twist incoming. Hayes felt control of the situation slipping away. In his experience, passengers either complied immediately or became obviously hostile. This calm, knowledgeable resistance was outside his training manual. Ma'am, I don't have time to debate regulations. Either you move voluntarily or I'll have security remove you. Camille reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. One quick text message sent without drama or announcement. Just 5 words. AA847PHXATL. Incident in progress. 3 time zones away in Washington, D.C. Daniel Rodriguez, Deputy Director of Aviation Safety Standards, read the message while reviewing night shift reports. He knew exactly what it meant. He'd been expecting this call for months. His response was immediate. Team mobilized. ETA 8 minutes. Stephanie watched Camille's phone activity with growing irritation. Ma'am, please put your device away. Your use of electronic devices is creating a safety hazard. I'm not using electronic devices, Camille replied. I sent one text message while parked at the gate. That's permitted under federal guidelines you should know. The knowledge gap was becoming obvious to everyone watching. Stephanie was improvising regulations. Camille was citing them accurately. Jessica Parker's live blog post had gone viral. Hashtag A-A-Flight 847 update. Crew appears to be making up rules as they go. Passenger demonstrates clear knowledge of actual regulations. This is fascinating and disturbing. 7 minutes had passed since Stephanie's first demand. Outside the aircraft, unusual activity was beginning at the gate. Security vehicles with flashing lights. Official cars arriving in formation. Ma'am Hayes said final warning. Move to the assigned seat or face removal. Camille looked directly into his eyes. "Captain, you're about to make a decision that will define your career. I suggest you verify passenger records and crew authority before proceeding." "Is that a threat?" Stephanie snapped. "It's a professional recommendation." Miguel's viewer count hit 2,000. The hashtag #A Flight 847 was trending in Phoenix and Atlanta. Comments flooded in from viewers who recognized the pattern, who'd lived through similar experiences, who understood exactly what was happening. Hayes turned away. "Stephanie, call security. We're removing this passenger." At that moment, 9 minutes and 30 seconds after Stephanie's first demand, the aircraft's ground control radio crackled to life. "American 847, ground control. You are directed to return to gate immediately. Do not taxi. Repeat, return to gate immediately." Hayes looked confused. "Ground, we haven't even started taxi. 847 contact ground control on landline immediately upon arrival at gate. Priority federal matter." The cabin went silent. Even Miguel stopped his running commentary. Federal matter. Those words carried weight that everyone understood, even if they didn't know why. Through the aircraft windows, passengers could see official vehicles surrounding the jet bridge. Federal agents in unmarked cars. Airport operations supervisors moving with urgent purpose. Stephanie's face had gone pale. "Captain, what's happening?" Hayes was reading urgent messages on his communication system. Orders from airline operations, instructions from federal authorities, demands for immediate compliance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced over the intercom, "we've been instructed to return to the gate for operational reasons." Camille sat quietly in seat 1A, watching the confusion unfold around her. 10 minutes and 45 seconds since this began. Right on schedule. Her phone buzzed. Daniel's message. "In position. Ready when you are." Miguel's live stream exploded with speculation. "Y'all, something big is about to happen. Federal cars, police, everyone's here. This woman must be somebody important. Maybe she's a lawyer. Maybe she's a reporter. Maybe she's about to destroy everyone who messed with her." The jet bridge extended toward the aircraft with a mechanical groan that sounded like inevitability. Stephanie stood frozen in the galley, still holding Camille's boarding pass and credit card, like evidence of a crime that was about to be redefined. David Rodriguez watched from the back, heart pounding, knowing he was witnessing something that would change everything. The training manuals talked about treating passengers with dignity and respect. Today, he was learning what happened when those principles were abandoned. Linda Thompson finished her champagne in one gulp. Jessica Parker's fingers flew across her phone, documenting every detail for the article that would make her career. And Miguel Santos kept recording his audience, now numbering in the thousands, all watching as Justice prepared to board Flight A847. Camille checked her phone one more time. 11 minutes exactly. Right on schedule. The aircraft door opened with a mechanical hiss that cut through the tense silence of the cabin. Stephanie Martinez stood paralyzed in the galley, still clutching Camille's boarding pass like a talisman that had lost its power. 12 years of service, hundreds of flights, thousands of passenger interactions, and nothing had prepared her for this moment. She thought about her daughter Sophia, 8 years old, waiting at home in Phoenix with her grandmother, the job that paid for dance classes and school supplies, and the small apartment near the good elementary school. The career she'd built one careful decision at a time, always following what her supervisors taught her about maintaining standards. Stephanie had learned those standards through observation and experience. Watch which passengers get upgrades without asking. Notice which complaints get taken seriously. Understand which faces belong in first class and which don't. It wasn't written in any manual, but it was as real as the aircraft systems she'd memorized. She remembered the training session 3 years ago when Crew Chief Marcus Rivera had pulled her aside. "You've got good instincts, Martinez. You know how to read people. That's what keeps flights running smoothly." Good instincts. She'd been praised for removing a teenager who seemed nervous, a woman whose dress looked too cheap for first class, a man who asked too many questions about meal service. The removals were always justified afterward. Disruptive behavior, suspicious activity, failure to comply with crew instructions. The passengers never complained publicly because they were offered vouchers upgrades on future flights, small compensations that bought silence. But this woman in seat 1A was different. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't made demands, hadn't even seemed surprised by the confrontation. The calm confidence was unsettling, like she knew something Stephanie didn't. Captain Robert Hayes stood beside the cockpit door checking messages that kept flooding his communications system. 28 years flying for American Airlines, from regional routes to international wide-bodies. He'd seen labor disputes, mechanical emergencies, weather crises, and passenger incidents, but federal agencies surrounding his aircraft was a first. Hayes remembered his training about crew authority and passenger compliance. The captain's word was law at 30,000 feet, but they weren't airborne yet, and the law seemed to be arriving at the gate in official vehicles with flashing lights. He thought about his pension just 4 years away, his daughter's college tuition still being paid monthly, the mortgage on the house in Dallas where he'd planned to retire and work on the Cessna in his garage. Everything that could disappear if he made the wrong decision in the next few minutes. The young flight attendant, David Rodriguez, pressed himself against the rear galley wall as federal agents began boarding the aircraft, 6 months out of training, still believing in the idealism that got him into aviation. Service to passengers, safety as the highest priority, dignity for all travelers. David had grown up in East L.A., the son of immigrants who cleaned office buildings at night and dreamed their children would work in those offices during the day. Aviation felt like a compromise between those dreams and reality. Professional work, steady pay, opportunities to travel. But watching Stephanie target the woman in 1A felt wrong. David had seen the pattern in his short time on the job. Certain passengers questioned more than others, certain names highlighted for additional screening, certain faces that prompted extra verification steps. In seat 2, a Miguel Santos adjusted his phone angle to capture the federal agents boarding the plane. His viewer count had exploded past 5,000, with people sharing the live stream across every social media platform. The comments were flying faster than he could read them. Miguel worked for a startup in Phoenix, developing social media analytics. He understood viral content engagement metrics and the moment when a story escaped local containment and became national news. This was that moment. He'd grown up in Phoenix, too, in neighborhoods where interactions with authority figures were complicated and careful. His grandfather had stories about being kicked out of restaurants in the 1960s. His parents had warnings about staying quiet and compliant when confronted by people with power. But Miguel also understood the power of technology and documentation. Live video couldn't be erased or explained away. Thousands of witnesses couldn't be intimidated into silence. This woman in the hoodie was about to teach everyone watching a lesson about accountability in the digital age. Jessica Parker leaned forward in seat 3B, professional instincts fully engaged. Travel journalism had taken her to 6 continents through airport security in dozens of countries aboard hundreds of flights. She'd documented service failures and excellence, cultural conflicts, and beautiful collaborations. This story felt different. Not just a customer service complaint or airline policy dispute, but something deeper. The woman being targeted had legal knowledge and calm authority that suggested professional expertise. The crew's fumbling responses indicated they were improvising outside normal procedures. Jessica's article drafts were already going viral on her blog. Her editor at Travel Digest had called twice demanding real-time updates. CNN's travel correspondent had messaged asking for quotes and photos. Whatever was about to happen, it would be documented by someone who understood the industry. Linda Thompson in seat 1B finally set down her champagne glass and looked directly at Camille for the first time. 58 years old, recently retired from a luxury marketing firm accustomed to first-class service and priority treatment. She'd initially supported the crew's actions because delay was inconvenience, and inconvenience was unacceptable when you paid premium prices for premium service. But the federal response was changing her calculation. Important people didn't get removed from first class. Important people had federal agents who responded to their phone calls. Linda started recognizing signals she'd missed earlier. The woman's posture spoke of professional confidence. Her responses indicated legal knowledge. Her phone had produced immediate results from powerful contacts. These weren't the characteristics of someone who belonged in coach. Doctor. Camille Washington sat quietly in seat 1. Watching the drama unfold around her with 20 years of investigation experience. She'd seen this pattern hundreds of times during safety audits and compliance reviews. Good people making bad decisions because they'd been trained to follow unwritten rules that contradicted written policies. Camille had grown up in Montgomery, Alabama during the 1980s and 1990s. Her grandmother had stories about bus boycotts and lunch counter sit-ins. Her parents had warnings about behavior in white spaces and the importance of being twice as good to get half as far. She'd chosen aviation safety as a career partly because aircraft didn't care about the color of passengers' skin. Physics was neutral. Engineering was objective. Safety protocols applied equally to everyone aboard. But people operated aircraft, and people brought biases into professional decisions. Camille had spent her career identifying and correcting those biases when they threatened safety. Today was personal, but it was also professional. A real-world test of whether her reforms were working. She'd deliberately chosen casual clothes and commercial airline travel to experience what ordinary passengers faced. The hoodie and jeans weren't disguise or deception, but authentic presentation. Dr. Camille Washington in professional settings. Camille Washington traveling home from work. The difference in treatment was stark and documented. Miguel's live stream had captured every detail. Jessica's articles provided professional analysis. Federal agents were responding with appropriate authority. Daniel Rodriguez, Deputy Director of Aviation Safety Standards, stepped onto the aircraft with a team of federal investigators. 38 years old, former military police, 10 years with FAA enforcement. He'd been Camille's deputy for 3 years and had learned to recognize the signs when she was conducting field research. The text message had been expected. Camille had been traveling incognito for 6 months, documenting passenger experience across multiple airlines. Previous incidents had been subtle enough to handle through administrative channels. This one required federal response. Daniel carried a tablet displaying real-time data about Flight AA-847. Crew records, passenger manifests, maintenance logs, security footage from the gate area. Everything needed to document what had happened and determine appropriate consequences. Behind him came Agent Sarah Martinez from the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Transportation. 35 years old specialized prosecutor for discrimination cases in interstate commerce. She'd been briefed on the investigation parameters and was prepared to determine whether federal laws had been violated. Airport Operations Supervisor James Wilson followed with security personnel and documentation equipment. The scene would be preserved, statements would be taken, evidence would be secured according to federal protocols. Stephanie watched the parade of authority boarding her aircraft and felt her career disintegrating in real time. 12 years of good evaluations and commendations. Employee of the Month awards. Perfect safety record. All of it evaporating because of 11 minutes of bad decisions. Captain Hayes read the federal instructions on his communication system and understood that his authority had been suspended. Federal agents were taking control of his aircraft, his crew, and his future. David Rodriguez straightened his uniform and prepared to tell the truth about what he'd witnessed. 6 months of employment versus a lifetime of integrity. The decision was easier than he'd expected. Miguel's audience had grown beyond his ability to track. The live stream was being shared on Twitter, reposted on TikTok, embedded on news websites. Hashtag AA-Flight-847 was trending nationally. Hashtag plane discrimination was picking up international attention. Jessica Parker was already drafting her headline, Federal Agents Board Aircraft, after passenger discrimination incident, What We Witnessed. Linda Thompson was calculating how to distance herself from her earlier comments supporting the crew. And Camille Washington sat quietly in seat 1A waiting for the next phase of a lesson that would change American aviation forever. The federal agents approached the first-class cabin with documentation and authority. The 11 minutes were over. The investigation was beginning. Agent Sarah Martinez stepped into the first-class cabin with the measured precision of someone accustomed to securing crime scenes. 35 years old, sharp suit, federal credentials clearly displayed. Her eyes swept the cabin, cataloging witness positions, recording device locations, and the obvious tension radiating from the crew. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying absolute authority. "I am Agent Martinez with the Department of Transportation Civil Rights Division. This aircraft is temporarily under federal investigation. Please remain in your seats while we document the situation." Miguel Santos adjusted his phone to capture the federal response, his live stream now reaching 15,000 viewers worldwide. Comments flooded in faster than the eye could follow. Federal agents on a plane. "This is wild. That woman must be someone important. Justice is coming. Plot twist of the century," Miguel whispered to his audience. "Y'all, this just became the most watched live stream in my channel's history. Something big is about to drop." Jessica Parker had abandoned any pretense of subtlety, holding her camera openly while live tweeting updates to her 50,000 followers. Her article draft was being shared across aviation industry websites and civil rights organizations. CNN and MSNBC producers were messaging requests for exclusive interviews. Hashtag A Flight 847 update, DOT Civil Rights Division now on aircraft. Federal investigation underway. This passenger knew exactly what she was doing. Professional thread coming. Agent Martinez approached Stephanie Martinez, first clipboard in hand. "Ms. Martinez, I need your crew identification and a preliminary statement about the passenger removal attempt." Stephanie's hands shook as she handed over her badge and credentials. 12 years of service reduced to a federal investigation number. I was following standard procedure for seating verification. "What specific procedure authorizes removal of a ticketed passenger from their assigned seat?" Agent Martinez asked. The computer showed an error. "We needed to verify. Show me the computer error documentation." Stephanie turned to her station terminal. The screen displayed standard passenger information. No error messages, no system alerts, no justification for the removal attempt. "There's no error showing now," Stephanie admitted. Agent Martinez made notes. "When did this alleged error first appear?" "When I looked at her." Stephanie's voice trailed off as she realized what she was admitting. Daniel Rodriguez, the F. A deputy director, had positioned himself near the cockpit with data analysis equipment. His tablet displayed crew performance records, passenger complaint histories, and incident patterns that painted a disturbing picture. "Captain Hayes," he called, "I need you to review these passenger removal statistics." Hayes approached reluctantly. The data was devastating. Stephanie Martinez had initiated 31 passenger removals in 3 years. The demographic breakdown was damning. 28 of these removals involved minority passengers, Daniel said quietly. "That's a 90% correlation rate. The probability of this being coincidental is statistically impossible." Captain Hayes stared at the numbers. He'd approved most of these removals based on Stephanie's recommendations, trusting her judgment, following her lead, becoming complicit in a pattern he'd never bothered to examine. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You didn't ask," Daniel replied. Miguel's live stream audience had exploded beyond 25,000 viewers. His phone was heating up from the processing demand. Tech colleagues were messaging about server capacity and bandwidth limitations. "Yo, this is Miguel Santos bringing you the craziest situation I've ever witnessed. Federal agents are pulling data about discriminatory removal patterns. This crew is about to get destroyed by their own records." The comments section had become a real-time civil rights rally. "My mom was removed from a flight last year for suspicious behavior, sleeping while black. This happens every day. Finally, someone with power to fight back documentation beats intimidation every time." That woman planned this perfectly. Respect. Jessica Parker was conducting impromptu interviews with surrounding passengers, building a comprehensive narrative of institutional bias masked as customer service standards. Linda, you're in 1B. What did you observe about the passengers' behavior before crew intervention? Linda Thompson, now acutely aware that her comments were being recorded for national distribution, carefully reconstructed her observations. She was quiet, reading on her tablet. No disruptive behavior whatsoever. Yet you initially supported the crew's removal demands. Linda hesitated. I made assumptions based on appearances. That was wrong. Agent Martinez was documenting passenger statements with federal precision. Each witness account strengthened the discrimination case and exposed the crew's fabricated justifications. David Rodriguez, the young flight attendant, had been separated for individual questioning. His account would be crucial as internal crew testimony. Mr. Rodriguez described the passenger's behavior from boarding through the removal attempt. David took a deep breath. She was completely professional. Quiet, polite, never raised her voice. Nothing about her conduct justified removal. Why didn't you speak up during the incident? I was scared, David admitted. Stephanie is my supervisor. I'm still in probation period. I thought I'd lose my job. And now I know I should have spoken up immediately. This was wrong, and I knew it was wrong. Agent Martinez made detailed notes. Internal crew testimony acknowledging discriminatory behavior. Perfect for prosecution preparation. Camille Washington remained seated in 1A, observing the investigation with professional interest. 20 years of conducting similar inquiries, but never as the subject of discrimination. The experience was educational and personally validating. Her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, supervisors, and media contacts who had identified her through social media coverage. The story was escalating beyond aviation industry attention to national civil rights focus. Secretary of Transportation, Camille, full federal support. Whatever you need. NAACP. Legal Defense Fund. Dr. Washington, we're monitoring situation. Resources available. Congressional Black Caucus. Federal investigation must be thorough and public. Miguel's live stream had become appointment viewing across social media platforms. Aviation employees were watching on break. Civil rights organizations were sharing the link. Law students were taking notes for future case studies. 28,000 viewers and climbing, Miguel announced. This is bigger than anything I've ever streamed. Y'all are witnessing history being made in real time. The viral hashtags were multiplying. Hashtag A flight 847 was trending nationally. Hashtag plain discrimination had international attention. Hashtag Camille Washington was climbing toward global recognition. Celebrity endorsements started appearing. Athletes, actors, politicians, and activists were sharing the live stream with commentary about travel discrimination experiences. This is exactly what I faced flying to away games. Questioned in first class like I didn't belong there. NBA player. Every business trip, same suspicious looks, same extra verification. Thank you for fighting back. Tech CEO. My grandmother was removed from a bus. My generation gets removed from planes. When does this end? Civil rights attorney Jessica Parker was fielding media requests while simultaneously reporting the story. Her editor had moved her article to the home page with breaking news alerts. Travel Digest exclusive. Federal investigation exposes airline discrimination pattern. Live updates from Flight AA847. The article included Miguel's live stream, embed passenger interview quotes, and analysis of the broader industry implications. Aviation stock prices were already declining in after-hours trading. Agent Martinez completed her preliminary evidence gathering and approached Camille with federal courtesy and professional recognition. Dr. Washington, I need an official statement for the federal record. Would you prefer to provide this privately or continue with witnesses present? Camille considered the options. Private statements protected personal dignity but allowed institutional cover-ups. Public accountability created transparency but invited media scrutiny. Public record, she decided. This conversation should be documented for everyone watching. Miguel elevated his phone to capture the exchange clearly. "Y'all, this is the moment we've been waiting for. The passenger is about to make an official federal statement." Agent Martinez activated her digital recording equipment. "Dr. Camille Washington, Senior Director of Aviation Safety Standards, Federal Aviation Administration. Please describe the discrimination you experienced aboard Flight AA-847. The formal identification rippled through the cabin like an earthquake. Federal Aviation Administration. Senior Director. This wasn't just any passenger. This was the person who regulated airline safety and crew behavior. Stephanie Martinez went completely pale. Captain Hayes closed his eyes. David Rodriguez straightened his shoulders with validation. Linda Thompson covered her mouth in shock. Miguel's audience exploded with reactions. "She's FAA. She regulates airlines. They tried to discriminate against the person who watches airline discrimination. This crew is so fired. Career suicide in 11 minutes." Camille spoke directly into the recording equipment, her voice carrying decades of professional authority and personal dignity. "I boarded Flight AA-847 with valid first-class documentation. I was seated quietly in my assigned seat when Flight Attendant Stephanie Martinez approached and demanded my removal based on fabricated computer errors. When I refused to move, she escalated to crew authority and threatened security intervention. At no point did I engage in disruptive behavior or violate any federal aviation regulation." Agent Martinez continued the documentation. "Did crew members provide regulatory justification for the removal demand? They cited vague safety authority without specific regulatory reference. When I requested documentation of the alleged computer error, none was provided. When I asked for safety justification, none was offered. The removal attempt was based entirely on visual assessment of my appearance and clothing. In your professional opinion as FAA Senior Director, did this incident violate federal anti-discrimination statutes?" "Yes." "This incident represents clear violation of DOT civil rights regulations, FAA, passenger treatment standards, and federal interstate commerce anti-discrimination law." The official statement was being live-streamed to 35,000 viewers and counting. Jessica Parker was transcribing every word for immediate publication. The federal investigation had just become a public education seminar on airline passenger rights. Miguel provided running commentary for his audience. "This woman just delivered a masterclass in how to handle discrimination with documentation and federal authority." Everyone taking notes. Agent Martinez concluded the preliminary investigation and addressed the cabin. "This aircraft will remain at the gate pending completion of federal evidence gathering. All passengers will be interviewed individually. Alternative transportation will be arranged." She turned to Stephanie and Captain Hayes. "Ms. Martinez and Captain Hayes, you are suspended from duty pending completion of the federal investigation. Please surrender your credentials and accompany federal agents for additional questioning." The career consequences were immediate and irreversible. 12 years of service and 28 years of flying ended in a federal investigation triggered by 11 minutes of discriminatory behavior. David Rodriguez watched his colleagues being led away by federal agents and understood that speaking truth to power was sometimes the only way to preserve integrity. Miguel's livestream had become the most watched discrimination incident in aviation history. The documentation would be used in training programs, legal proceedings, and policy development for years to come. And Camille Washington remained seated in 1A, having demonstrated that dignity and federal authority could transform individual discrimination into institutional accountability. The investigation was just beginning. The federal agents led Stephanie Martinez and Captain Hayes off the aircraft in handcuffs. Not because they were under arrest, but because federal protocols required secured transport during civil rights investigations. The image would be burned into every news report and social media post about the incident. Miguel Santos captured it all on his live stream, now reaching 42,000 viewers across multiple platforms. Y'all, I'm watching two airline employees get federally escorted off their own plane. The woman they tried to remove is literally their boss's boss's boss. The comments exploded faster than servers could process them. This is justice. She played the long game perfectly. Never mess with federal regulators. Career over in 11 minutes. Jessica Parker was filing live updates to her blog while simultaneously conducting phone interviews with CNN, MSNBC, and 3 major newspapers. This is Jessica Parker reporting from Flight AA847, where we've just witnessed the most spectacular reversal of power dynamics in aviation history. Her article headline had evolved FAA Director. Exposes airline discrimination through undercover flight experience. Crew federally suspended. Agent Sarah Martinez returned to the cabin with additional federal personnel and evidence-gathering equipment. The investigation was expanding beyond individual crew misconduct to institutional patterns and corporate liability. Dr. Washington. She said we need to examine American Airlines passenger removal policies and crew training materials. This appears to extend beyond individual bias to company-wide problems. Daniel Rodriguez. The FAA Deputy Director had connected his analysis equipment to the aircraft's passenger service system. The data was devastating. Not just Stephanie Martinez, but multiple crew members across American Airlines operation showed similar discrimination patterns. Camille, he said quietly, the database reveals coordinated removal targeting. Minority passengers flagged for additional screening, elevated security protocols, and preferential removal during overbooked situations. This isn't individual bias. This is institutional practice. Camille nodded grimly. 20 years of safety investigations had taught her that individual incidents usually reflected broader failures. Today's discrimination was tomorrow's safety crisis, because companies that tolerated bias in customer service usually tolerated shortcuts in maintenance and training. Linda Thompson, in Seat 1B, was processing the magnitude of her mistake. 58 years old, recently retired from luxury marketing, she understood brand damage and reputation management. American Airlines was about to face a corporate crisis that would reshape industry standards. Dr. Washington, she said hesitantly, I owe you an apology. My initial reaction was based on assumptions that were completely inappropriate. Camille turned to face her directly. Ms. Thompson, your reaction was honest. That's valuable feedback about how discrimination operates in public spaces. Most people don't intervene when they witness bias because they assume authority figures must be justified. How do we do better? Question authority when it targets dignity. Document discrimination when you see it. Support victims instead of defending systems. David Rodriguez. The young flight attendant had remained on the aircraft to provide witness testimony and assistance with passenger needs. His 6 months of employment had just become the foundation for federal whistleblower protections and career advancement in aviation safety. Mr. Rodriguez, Agent Martinez said your cooperation with this investigation demonstrates integrity and professional courage. The FAA will be recommending you for accelerated advancement and specialized civil rights training. David felt overwhelming relief mixed with professional validation. Speaking truth to power was terrifying, but silence in the face of discrimination was career suicide disguised as job security. Miguel's live stream had become appointment viewing for aviation industry professionals, civil rights organizations, and social justice advocates worldwide. The viewer count approached 60,000 with engagement metrics that broke platform records. This is Miguel Santos bringing you the most important live stream of my life. We're watching real-time accountability for airline discrimination, and it's beautiful. His audience was sharing clips across every social media platform. TikTok videos with millions of views, Twitter threads with hundreds of thousands of retweets, Instagram stories from verified accounts with massive followings. The hashtags were dominating global trending topics. Hashtag AA Flight 847 was worldwide news. Hashtag FAA Justice was inspiring similar stories from discrimination victims. Hashtag Camille Washington was becoming a symbol of dignified resistance. Celebrity endorsements continued multiplying. Athletes shared travel discrimination experiences. Actors discussed similar treatment at premieres and industry events. Politicians called for congressional hearings on transportation civil rights. American Airlines stock price dropped 4% in after-hours trading. Corporate crisis management teams were being assembled. Legal departments were reviewing liability exposure. Public relations firms were developing damage control strategies. The airline's CEO received emergency briefings about federal investigation scope, media attention, magnitude, and potential financial consequences. The incident was escalating beyond customer service failures to corporate governance and shareholder value concerns. Agent Martinez addressed the remaining passengers with federal authority and professional courtesy. Ladies and gentlemen, alternative transportation is being arranged. Your cooperation with this investigation is noted and appreciated. Anyone who witnessed discrimination or bias should provide contact information for follow-up interviews. Every passenger volunteered to participate. The federal investigation would include comprehensive witness testimony video evidence from multiple sources and documentary proof of institutional discrimination patterns. Camille Washington finally stood from seat 1A after 90 minutes of federal evidence gathering. Her casual hoodie and jeans had become symbols of authenticity versus assumption, substance versus appearance, dignity versus discrimination. Agent Martinez. She said, "I want this investigation to extend beyond individual accountability to structural reform. American Airlines needs complete policy review, mandatory bias training, independent oversight, and public reporting of passenger treatment statistics." Dr. Washington, the Department of Transportation is prepared to pursue comprehensive remediation, including potential criminal referrals for civil rights violations. Miguel captured Camille's movement through the cabin as she prepared to deplane. "Y'all, this woman just single-handedly changed aviation civil rights enforcement. She didn't just win her individual fight. She's fixing the whole industry." The federal agents had transformed the aircraft into an active crime scene with evidence tags, photography equipment, and detailed documentation procedures. The investigation would produce a case study used in law schools, business schools, and civil rights training programs. Jessica Parker was already planning her follow-up articles and potential book deal. The 11 minutes that changed aviation, inside the federal investigation that exposed airline discrimination. As Camille walked through the jet bridge, accompanied by federal agents and media attention, her phone buzzed with messages from the highest levels of government and civil rights leadership. Secretary of Transportation, Dr. Washington, you have complete federal support for whatever reforms this investigation reveals are necessary. AACP, President Camille. This courage inspires everyone fighting discrimination in interstate commerce. Congressional Black Caucus Chair. Federal hearings scheduled. Your testimony will reshape transportation civil rights law. The terminal outside Gate C-17 buzzed with media presence and public attention. Camera crews from major networks, reporters from national newspapers, aviation industry journalists covering the biggest story of their careers. But Camille Washington walked through the attention with the same calm dignity she'd maintained in seat 1A. Federal authority wasn't about power over others. It was about responsibility to protect everyone's rights equally. Miguel Santos concluded his historic live stream with a message that would be quoted in civil rights courses and discrimination lawsuits for years to come. Today we learned that dignity doesn't depend on recognition. Justice doesn't require permission. And sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who dress like they don't have power at all. Dr. Camille Washington just taught America a lesson about equality documentation and never backing down when you know you're right. The live stream ended with 68,000 viewers and millions of eventual views across shared platforms. Miguel had documented the most comprehensive real-time federal civil rights enforcement in aviation history. David Rodriguez remained on the aircraft, helping passengers gather belongings and providing witness support for the ongoing investigation. His career in aviation would be defined by the courage he'd shown during 11 minutes of moral testing. Linda Thompson collected her luggage with a new understanding of how privilege operates and how quickly assumptions can be exposed as bias. Her retirement years would include volunteer work with civil rights organizations and discrimination prevention training. Jessica Parker had the story that would define her journalism career: federal investigation, exclusive access, real-time documentation of civil rights enforcement, professional analysis of institutional discrimination patterns, and American Airlines faced federal oversight, criminal investigation, and civil liability that would cost tens of millions of dollars in settlements reforms and reputation recovery. The 11 minutes were over. The consequences would last for years. As Camille Washington entered the terminal, surrounded by federal agents and media attention, she reflected on the investigation that had begun as personal experience and evolved into institutional accountability. 20 years of aviation safety work had taught her that individual incidents reflected broader patterns. Today's discrimination was prevented through documentation, federal authority, and public transparency. The flight attendant who ordered her off the plane didn't know she regulated aviation safety, but now everyone would know that discrimination had consequences, dignity had defenders, and federal authority existed to protect everyone's equal rights. The investigation was just beginning. The reforms would be comprehensive, and the precedent would protect future travelers who might not have federal credentials but deserved equal treatment regardless of appearance, background, or assumptions. Justice had been served at 35,000 feet above ground level, but the real work was just getting started. The American Airlines Corporate Crisis Center activated at 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time, triggered by automated alerts monitoring social media sentiment and federal investigation keywords. Miguel Santos's live stream had broken platform records. Jessica Parker's articles were trending on every major news website. #AAFlight847 was the top trending topic globally. CEO Marcus Thompson received emergency briefings while en route to Dallas headquarters via corporate jet. 48 years old, 15 years with the airline, he'd managed labor disputes, mechanical crises, and weather emergencies. But federal civil rights investigations required different expertise and carried existential corporate risks. The initial briefing was devastating. Dr. Camille Washington wasn't just any passenger. Senior Director of Aviation Safety Standards, 20-year federal career, direct authority over airline safety certificates, crew licensing, and operational permits. The woman, Stephanie Martinez, had tried to remove literally controlled American Airlines' future. Thompson's legal team was already calculating exposure. Individual discrimination lawsuits typically settled for hundreds of thousands. Federal civil rights violations carried million-dollar penalties. Institutional pattern discovery could trigger Department of Justice criminal referrals and congressional oversight hearings. Stock futures were declining in international markets. Institutional investors were requesting emergency briefings. Travel industry analysts were downgrading American Airlines ratings. The financial consequences were cascading faster than crisis management could contain them. In Washington, D.C., the Department of Transportation Civil Rights Division was establishing a task force for comprehensive investigation of airline discrimination patterns. Agent Sarah Martinez had been promoted to lead investigator with unlimited federal resources and direct cabinet-level reporting. The investigation scope was expanding beyond American Airlines to industry-wide examination. Delta, United Southwest, and regional carriers were all subject to federal scrutiny. Passenger removal databases, crew training materials, and complaint resolution procedures would be reviewed comprehensively. Dr. Camille Washington arrived at her Georgetown townhouse after midnight, accompanied by federal security detail and media attention that required police barriers and traffic control. Her quiet neighborhood had become the center of national civil rights focus. Inside her home office, she reviewed investigation materials while federal agents documented evidence and prepared criminal referrals. 20 years of safety investigations had prepared her for comprehensive institutional reform, but experiencing discrimination personally added emotional weight to professional obligations. Her husband David met her in the kitchen with coffee and concern. "Are you okay? The news coverage is incredible." "I'm fine," Camille replied, "but the investigation is just beginning. This extends far beyond one flight attendant or one airline. We're looking at institutional bias masquerading as customer service standards." The preliminary data was staggering. Stephanie Martinez had removed 31 passengers in 3 years. 28 were minorities. The statistical impossibility of coincidence established clear discrimination intent, but database analysis revealed broader patterns. American Airlines had quietly settled 47 discrimination complaints in 5 years. $2.3 million in payments to avoid publicity and legal precedent. Corporate legal strategy designed to buy silence and prevent reform. Internal training materials were equally damaging. Crew resource management guidelines included coded language about passenger appearance assessment and cabin atmosphere management. Translation: remove people who don't look like they belong in premium sections. Flight attendant evaluation criteria included cultural sensitivity metrics that rewarded compliance with unwritten rules about passenger demographics. Stephanie Martinez had received performance bonuses for maintaining cabin standards through targeted removals. Miguel Santos was fielding media interview requests while his original live stream generated millions of views across shared platforms. Tech companies were analyzing engagement metrics and viral distribution patterns. Academic researchers were requesting permission to study real-time civil rights documentation. This live stream represents the first comprehensive real-time federal civil rights enforcement in aviation history, said Dr. Maria Rodriguez, professor of digital media and social justice at Georgetown University. The documentation quality and audience reach created unprecedented accountability pressure. Miguel had gained 200,000 new followers in 12 hours. Sponsorship offers from civil rights organizations. Speaking invitations from law schools and journalism programs. His accidental activism was becoming professional advocacy. But Miguel remained focused on the larger implications. This isn't about my internet fame. This is about proving that regular people can document injustice and create change when we stick together. Jessica Parker was coordinating with legal experts and aviation industry analysts to provide comprehensive coverage of investigation developments. Her Travel Digest articles were being cited by major newspapers and television news programs. The American Airlines incident represents a watershed moment for transportation civil rights enforcement, she wrote. Federal authority combined with real-time documentation has created accountability mechanisms that make discrimination costly and transparent. Aviation industry trade publications were struggling to balance corporate relationships with journalistic integrity. Airline executives were major advertisers, but the discrimination evidence was undeniable and federal investigation unavoidable. Flight attendant unions were distancing themselves from Stephanie Martinez while supporting David Rodriguez's whistleblower testimony. Union solidarity doesn't extend to protecting discriminatory behavior, said Maria Santos, president of the Association of Flight Attendants. David Rodriguez demonstrated professional courage that deserves recognition and protection. Pilot associations were reviewing Captain Hayes' suspension and supporting federal investigation expansion. Crew authority exists to ensure safety, not enforce bias, said Captain Lisa Williams, spokesperson for the Airline Pilots Association. When authority is misused for discrimination, it undermines trust and compromises actual safety. Corporate legal teams across the aviation industry were reviewing passenger removal policies and crew training materials. The investigation precedent would affect every airline operating in American airspace. International aviation authorities were monitoring developments for potential policy implications. European Union transportation officials were comparing American discrimination patterns with European passenger rights protections. Civil rights organizations were mobilizing comprehensive response campaigns. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund announced federal monitoring of airline passenger treatment. The American Civil Liberties Union established a transportation discrimination reporting hotline. Congressional leaders scheduled oversight hearings within 2 weeks. The House Transportation Committee would examine federal civil rights enforcement in aviation. The Senate Judiciary Committee would review criminal referral procedures for institutional discrimination. Dr. Camille Washington testified via secure video conference to congressional staff, providing technical briefing on investigation scope and reform requirements. This incident represents visible evidence of invisible patterns, she explained. Discrimination operates through customer service procedures that appear neutral but target specific demographics. Federal oversight must address both individual bias and institutional enablement. The investigation database was revealing discrimination patterns across multiple airlines and transportation sectors. Rental car companies, hotel chains, and ride-sharing platforms all showed similar targeting of minority customers through quality control and safety verification procedures. American Airlines attempted damage control through public apology and immediate policy announcements. CEO Thompson held a press conference promising comprehensive reform. But the federal investigation was beyond corporate crisis management control. We sincerely apologize to Dr. Washington and commit to immediate comprehensive review of all passenger service policies, Thompson said. American Airlines will cooperate fully with federal investigation and implement whatever reforms are necessary. But apologies couldn't reverse federal criminal referrals or prevent civil liability. The investigation had exposed institutional patterns that required structural remediation beyond public relations strategies. Stephanie Martinez was cooperating with federal agents in exchange for reduced criminal exposure. Her testimony was revealing crew training that encouraged discrimination through coded language and performance incentives. We were taught to maintain cabin atmosphere and passenger comfort, she explained during federal interview. That meant removing people who didn't fit the first-class image. I thought I was doing my job correctly. Captain Hayes was providing similar cooperation, admitting that he'd approved passenger removals without investigation based on crew recommendations. I trusted my flight attendants' judgment and didn't question their assessments. I realize now that was negligent leadership. David Rodriguez was receiving federal whistleblower protections and accelerated career advancement. His courage during the investigation was being recognized by aviation safety organizations and civil rights groups. David Rodriguez represents the professional integrity that aviation safety requires, said Dr. Washington. Speaking truth to power protects everyone aboard aircraft. His example should be standard, not exceptional. The investigation was generating comprehensive documentation that would reshape transportation civil rights law. Legal scholars were analyzing federal authority precedents. Business schools were developing case studies about institutional bias and corporate liability, but the human impact remained central to all reform discussions. Dr. Camille Washington had experienced discrimination that millions of travelers faced without federal credentials or media attention. Her individual courage was creating protection for everyone who followed. As the investigation expanded through its first week, the consequences continued cascading through corporate boardrooms, federal agencies, and public awareness. The 11 minutes aboard Flight AA847 had become a comprehensive examination of how